This episode of Recovery is Possible is brought to you by Retreat Behavioral Health, where there are endless possibilities for recovery. Retreat provides quality care at their leading mental health and substance use treatment centers, which are designed to offer patients truly personalized and comprehensive programs that are tailored to their needs. Retreat substance use and mental health treatment centers in Palm Beach County, Florida, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and New Haven, Connecticut do everything in their power to ensure that patients receive the highest quality treatment in a safe and comfortable setting. So reach out today at retreatbehavioralhealth.com or call at 855-802-6600 for more information. Hey everybody, this is Mike Van Meter and welcome to Recovery is Possible. And, you know, I have had the pleasure of having a lot of guests on this program, and today is one of those days. I'm going to have John Monaghan joining me, and John has been doing a lot of work in the mental health and resilience area, and he's going to talk about that a little bit and talk a little bit about his story. And if you've not checked out his material, and we'll put a link to some of his material here in this podcast, check it out. I was earlier today looking at a TEDx video from Portsmouth where he was doing a presentation, and I was just really touched by it and really talking about the importance of mental health. And in fact, he made a statement at the end of the video that I thought was very appropriate. In fact, I was inspired to write it down, and that was, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's the most courageous thing that you can do. And that is so true. And there's so many of you out there that are hurting, maybe struggling with addiction, mental health issues, and the reason why you're not getting help is because of maybe shame, stigma, a lot of different reasons, and he'll talk about that. And we were connected through a former coworker of mine at the FBI Academy when I was teaching at the National Academy there, teaching police executives. And we both retired, and my former coworker was at a conference where he met John and suggested that we connected, and we did, and I'm glad that we did. And so with that, I want to bring John to the program. Thanks for coming on today, John.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do, and sort of you've had kind of a twist and turning journey in your career, and which is kind of interesting. So share that with us.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't start police work till I was about 28 years old. I grew up on Cape Cod down in Massachusetts, or on the ocean in New England, and so I went to college, and I was a furniture maker and a forestry guy. I cut a lot of trees and had a long beard, and then I also got married and had a kid, and I was doing martial arts and thinking, man, I need a steady paycheck and some medical benefits. And I'd always kind of had a heart for service. And that's how I got into police work. I was literally reading the paper one day, and I thought, I could probably do that. Some people want to be cops their whole lives. And for me, it was literally an ad in the paper. I walked in, and I think they said, how long have you wanted to be a cop? I'm like, I don't know how long's the ad been in the paper. And the rest was written, man. From there, off to the police academy I went, and 20 some odd years there I was chief, retiring and all that.
So that was a pretty circuitous, if I can put it that way, career as a police officer, and then eventually became a police chief. And tell us a bit about how you got into the work that you're doing now, and maybe describe that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I started as a patrolman in Lebanon, New Hampshire. It was a small little town, and eventually, after about 3 years doing that, I became a state trooper, and I worked in a rural area where there were 9 towns and only 2 police departments. So I was what you call a residential or rural trooper. So I was the cop for 7 towns. My patrol partner, a guy just to the south of me, was named Jamie, and he and I were pretty good friends. When we would go on canine calls, he was a canine guy. I would be a shotgunner, that kind of thing. And, we were quite close. And after I left state police, I became a police chief in a small town called Franconia. And I just happened to have been reading this book called Resilience by this author, Eric Greitens. He's a retired Navy SEAL, and he had written this book about a friend of his who had suffered a pretty severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and coincidentally was also an alcoholic. And my friend Jamie was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and he was really struggling. And of course, the stigma with policing or any first responder organization is oftentimes, these things seen as moral failings of some sort, that if we were just stronger, better people, we wouldn't have issues like post-traumatic stress, or we wouldn't have issues like substance use disorders or alcoholism or mental health issues, whatever they may be. And so he was really reaching out, and I reached back, and I kind of battle buddied it out with him with my limited knowledge at that point. And that's really kind of what started me on my journey through learning about mental health, and eventually, understanding resilience in a much deeper way, as well as post-traumatic growth work.
Yeah, and that is so important, because you're talking about the field that we are in, which is law enforcement or military. I'm a military guy in law enforcement, and getting help in any form or fashion has been historically something that just was not done. This is a world where that's perceived as weakness. And when you look at AA, for the 12-step people that are out there, when you look at step 1 of AA, I'm powerless over alcohol, my life's become unmanageable. That word powerlessness is not in our vocabulary. And which is okay when you're a police officer, or if you're in the military, that's a really good trait to have. But when you're an addict and alcohol fits into that category, it's really a death sentence, because you're not going to go to your organization and say that you need help, because people look at you as being weak. Now, I will say that has been changing for the better over the years, but we're certainly not there yet now. And we certainly weren't there back when I got into recovery, and I'm assuming that was the same with you. But somewhere, something happened with you where you decided, okay, this is the field that I'm going to go into. This is the work I'm going to do, because that's what happened to me. There was something that led me to the work that I'm doing now, because I did not 30 years ago say to myself, I'm going to become a drug and alcohol therapist. That was not in the plan, and there's a long, convoluted story as to how that happened. And it sounds like something similar happened with you, because this is the work that you do now. And so how do we get from being a cop, doing what you're doing, to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that sort of the reoccurring theme, whether it's the recovery world or post-traumatic growth world, or even sort of the building blocks of resilience, is being of service, and giving back. And so I think that's eventually how I got to where I got. And sort of to tell you the story of my own recovery, I really didn't start drinking till, a year or two into my career. So I was in my, maybe 30 or something like that. I'd have a beer or two once in a while. And I had, this horrific story, about dealing with this call. And I was like, God, what'd you do? A week off, a couple weeks off, see a therapist, thinking of all the healthy options. He goes, now I drank a 6-pack so I could fall asleep. And unfortunately, as a lot of young cops do, I was like, well, I guess that's the way we do it here, and I'll never forget. I even mentioned in this TED Talk, the call was, it was an infant really that had been sexually assaulted. And I had a little daughter, and so I went on the call. It was a midnight shift, and I got off. And that morning, I bought a 6-pack of beer, and I went home and I watched her sleep in her crib, and I drank beer, and I was just devastated by this call, and I didn't know it at the time, but one definition of trauma is a disruption to our core values to the degree that our coping mechanisms are overwhelmed. And what I didn't realize at that point was that was starting to happen for me, that these sort of small or large incidents of our career, when they hit home like that, for lack of a better term, I started using alcohol as a bit of a, they say it's fun, and then problems, and then it's just problem. I went from a beer or two here and there to, I remember telling my aunt, I said, God, I like beer, but it gives me a hangover. I can't stand the feeling. She goes, oh, try single malt Scotch. And sure enough, what a more efficient delivery system that turned out to be without as much of a hangover. So I became a whiskey drinker, and and that's what I did. I would work, and I would come home and I would exercise, and then at 5 o'clock, because this is the things that we tell ourselves. I'm not an alcoholic if you drink at 5, and so at 5 o'clock it was cocktail hour. And so I did that for a very long time, and that was sort of my way of dealing with things, was just, I was going to give myself relief, so I was working shift work. And so 5 o'clock came at various times a day, depending on what shift I was working. But, there was always drinking involved, and that just progressed over time. And so interestingly, when I was Jamie, I heard this guy give a talk at a AA meeting the other day, and he said, I went from step 1 to step 12, and I skipped everything in between until sobriety got too painful for me, and I realized I had to do the middle part. And I think that was true for me. When he was hurting and reaching out for help, I was hurting and didn't know quite how to help myself. I was dealing with that stigma. I was a police chief at the time, and I knew I had a problem back when I was a trooper too, but I just, I wasn't in a culture where if you did that, like, your career was over. If anybody knew, you were seen as somebody who couldn't handle your booze or whatever it might be, by people who are drinking just as much as you are, And so, I went from education, I guess, I realizing that there's problems, and post-traumatic growth kind of has these different aspects to it. And the first step, in post-traumatic growth is education. And the final part is being of service. And so for my trajectory in post-traumatic growth, just like some people in sobriety, I went from step 1 to step 12, and I skipped the middle part. So for me, even though I was helping my friend, I was still drinking, and as a police chief, I did that for quite some time. And I'll tell you this, I it made my marriage rough. I ended up getting divorced, and I had 2 kids. I put a lot of strain on my relationship with my daughter, and my son and I always had a great relationship. And he would come and stay with me, and I'll tell you this part. This is kind of a real pivotal moment for me. I was getting divorced, and I was drinking a fair amount. And I describe my alcoholism like this, right? Like, I had a list of problems, a whole list of problems. Pain in the ass citizens, dangerous calls I was going on. The only 2 things that weren't on that list were me and alcohol. And so I had a list of problems, and me and alcohol weren't on it. And my son went on a trip once with the rec center in the town that I was working in, and he got assaulted on that trip, and that devastated me. When we talk about the thing that that really gets you, like, for me, that was, I didn't realize, but one of my really core values, because I grew up in a fairly neglectful household. For me, providing my kids all the safety and security I never had was absolutely sacred to my being, who I was, my identity, and so for all the tragedy, for all the horrible things that I had seen on the road, they definitely, did their part. They were definitely pebbles in my backpack, but one, man, that was like, forgive my expression, but that was a proverbial kick in the nuts. That one hurt. And I would say that, not that my drinking took off, but it was like the one place I could kind of go for solstice, and the right thing. I helped him. I actually disclosed to him some things that had happened to me as a young man, and allowed him to go get the help. And his therapist told me, he's going to be all right. He's going to be all right, and I was just devastated by that. And he's actually doing great. He's a Marine right now. And once a Marine, always a Marine, and He's done quite well for himself. He's a tough kid. He's a good kid, and I hope that he doesn't have the addiction gene like I do. But we talk about it. He gave me my 2-year medallion, for getting sober. But sort of how that plays into post-traumatic growth and recovery, for me at least, is I left the town I was working in as a police chief at that point because I just couldn't kind of in good conscience stay there after, kind of putting him in their care, the place that I had literally put my life on the line for 5.5 years. I just had to get out of there. So I ended up going to this other town and being the chief there. And it was tough. I had this, it was a bit of a dysfunctional police department. And I'm the chief and I'm thinking I'm going to walk in there like my shit doesn't stink and everything's going to be great. And boy, it wasn't. I had a friend who used this expression. And he said, "You lost the locker room." And I was like, man, I don't even think I ever had the locker room in that place, and it felt like a bit of a hockey fight from the day I walked in the door. They had their idea of how things were going to be and I had mine, and they did not align well. Again, a list of problems, and me and alcohol weren't on it, and I kept drinking and drinking. And that's when I really cracked, I really cracked at one point while I was working there. And that's when I ended up going and seeing the therapist. I was like, I don't know what's happening to me, but I'm like literally having panic attacks. And she told me, she's like, it's chronic stress. You have chronic stress. From everything you've seen. And she said, you left your heart and your mind, your soul out on that field, bud. And, you did the most courageous thing you could do. And you asked for help. I didn't ask for alcohol at that point, though. I just had asked for help, like emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is how you just said that you asked for help, but you didn't ask for help with alcohol. And I see that a lot with the patients that come in to see us now in the hospital. And I'll ask them, why do you drink? Or why did you relapse? And they'll tell you, because my boss is a jerk. My wife left me. I lost my job. Whatever. My dog died. A lot of different issues. And they'll always say that. But ironically, sitting in a detox unit in the hospital, very rarely do the patients say, I drink because I'm an alcoholic, right? And so in police work, in life, but since we're talking specifically police work, the fact is there are police officers and agents that go through the same trauma that we do that don't drink. Now, we get the impression that everybody in the department drinks, but the fact is not everybody does. But we go to drinking, and you mentioned something there, that genetic predisposition. You mentioned the genetics. That's definitely a big part of it. But it was kind of interesting that you initially said to your therapist that you were struggling, but you did not mention alcohol. So I'm just kind of curious as to when did that come into the picture? And then when did the light go off and go, you know what, alcohol is not helping this? So where was that transition?
That's a great question. I'll tell you this. Yeah, I heard it in a meeting once, and this woman said the elevator gets off at every floor, and rock bottom is when you decide to stop digging. And so for me, I heard the magic words, it sounds like chronic stress has gotten to you, not drinking, chronic stress. And I was like, you know what, that's what it is. It's the chronic stress. And I was a good police chief. I was a good husband. I was a good dad. I was all those things. I was a very high functioning alcoholic or a classy one, as I like to call myself. So that was sort of the thing. I was a mess, and I think even in retrospect, if I was sober, John, back then, it still would have been a really, really hard place to work and a really hard career.
Oh, sure.
But
sure.
Yeah. But definitely, my grandfather was a terrible alcoholic and all my mother's brothers. And I wouldn't doubt my mom, but when she got pregnant with me, she just stopped drinking and never did again because I don't think she wanted to do to me what her family was like. So I definitely had the genes for it, and so really I retired and I was like, great, now, because I had convinced myself I'm a problem drinker, and once all these problems went away, so would my dad. And literally a month later, the pandemic hit, and I was Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I was like, oh, I'll be damned, I'm drinking a little bit more and a little bit earlier, but I was like, I'm just celebrating. That's all. I'm tired and I'm celebrating, and it's all the things we tell to sort of justify our drinking. And I did all sorts of shit. I was vegan. I meditated. I exercised. Like, I did all the right stuff except for wrestle this one thing to the ground. And I often talk to people. I tell them I'm a super well accomplished guy. Like, I have black belts. I have a master's degree. I was a police chief. I've done triathlon. Drinking, I could not do, but I'll do it. And drinking was kicking my ass. And I was out on a bike ride. I'm retired. I'm like living the life, and I coughed up some blood, and it really scared me. And I was like, oh Jesus! So I went to the ER, and they're like, oh well, you probably like swallowed a bug or something. I of course Google it like everybody does. I'm like, esophageal hemorrhaging. I'm like, oh my God, my alcoholism's caught up to me. I'm willing to admit this to myself at this point. So they tell me, you know what? You're everything's fine, but coincidentally and oddly, sir, because you're a very healthy guy, your liver and kidney labs are off. And I was like, yeah, but I knew exactly what the problem was, and I wasn't willing to admit it to them. I admitted it to myself that day. I was like, I gotta quit drinking, and I had no idea what to do. I reached out to a friend of mine who was in the fellowship. He never called me back. And he's on my resentment list, the bastard. No, I'm just kidding. But he, but if
he hears this podcast, you can make amends for that if he hears this.
Yeah, I will. So anyways, I because it was COVID, there was Zoom meetings everywhere. And so I went online, I figured out how to get myself to a meeting online. And I it took me about a week after that hospital visit to finally like put the bottle down. But I went online and I found a meeting, and they told me this thing. It chokes me up to this day, and I hear it in meetings, but they said, you're the most important guy in the room. And I'm like, where in the hell on this earth can you go feeling about as ugly as you feel about yourself, admitting something that you have been holding in shame forever? And people are like, yeah, like literally clapping for you. Like, thank God you're here. You're in the right place. I mean, didn't feel like a beautiful thing at the time, but, as I witness it as a sober man, it is the most beautiful thing I think I've ever seen, and the fellowship for me has been just a godsend, and so that was the day I surrendered. It was June 10th, 2021, coming up on 3 years of sobriety this year. Yeah, thank you. And so and I got to say, it was the hardest dang thing I've ever done. I mean, like I said, I can accomplish a whole lot, but I couldn't accomplish that by myself, and I think we have this idea of like being the ruggedly independent guy and never asking for help and, all that. And boy, alcohol is not really one of those things that you can like accomplish on your own. I mean, some people, I suppose, can white knuckle it, but man, I couldn't. And, it takes definitely a power greater than myself, whatever that is for the person who needs the help, whether it's a group of drunks that's going to help you out, or God, or whatever deity you subscribe to. And for me, that actually has been a tremendous journey. It reconnected me to a spirituality that I had long since left back when I walked out of the doors of Catholic school as a teenager. I was like, enough of that. So, it's really done wonders for my life. And so, it was at that point that I got a sponsor. And I was like, I'm all in. What do I got to do? And, fortunately, my sort of that dedication and determination and, attention to detail, all the good things about police work served me well getting sober, because when my sponsor gave me an order, or a suggestion, as they call them, I followed it, and to the letter. And I went through the step process. And it's been quite transformative for me. I'd been to therapy before and all that, but doing my 4 step and writing out my resentments and really looking at the patterns of myself was so informative in no other way that I'd ever experienced, and being able to sort of put that stuff behind me and say, I am done with this. I see my part in it. And now I have a path forward, to how to make amends for it. And it's really just changed my life tremendously. And, I say this if like I was a good police chief, I was a good dad, but I am definitely like the best version of myself now that I've ever been, even before drinking. The me that was predisposed to drinking is not me anymore. Yeah, sure. I know if I pick up, I'm on a Nantucket sleigh ride that is not in my control. So I stay away. But I didn't have these tools. I think the reason I did drink is because I was missing some tools, really able to show about in ways I couldn't before. Which really kind of gets into that post-traumatic growth work that I do now.
So how did you get into that? These are really good points. So that your focus is the post-traumatic growth, and maybe describe how these two go hand in hand. Obviously, because I often, if you ever hear me speak in public, I always talk about causes and conditions. Right, the condition is we have that genetic predisposition that you mentioned, but we want to check out, addiction is isolation, recovery is community. And there's something, we have things that happen in our lives that cause us to want to check out and not be present and be numb. After all, if I was to go out and drink tonight, or if you were to go out and drink, either one of us, it's usually not going to be because something great happened in your life. It's going to be because something bad happened. Maybe there's a death in your life, or just something traumatic happens in your life today, and you're going to say, okay, well, a drink sounds like a good idea, and then we're on the roller coaster again. And so it seems like you have a real interest in connecting that trauma to this, and it seems like your focus right now is the trauma work. So how do we lead in that direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I grew up, kind of having in many ways, sort of fending for myself. My folks had divorced, and, my mom ended up going to work. So my sister and I were left alone to our own devices. I was the older of the two of us, so I kind of had this, screw it, I'll do it myself attitude my whole life, and that didn't serve me well. Like you said, that isolation versus connection, kind of kept me from being able to ask for help and relying on others, and all that stuff. It keeps us from being addicted to stuff. And so, the post-traumatic growth work, I mentioned my friend Jamie earlier, and resilience, is essentially made up of several things, but having a purpose and mastery over some stuff, self reflectability, and having a group of people you care about, and I certainly wanted to help him, but I wasn't really kind of willing to take a deep look at myself. And it wasn't until I got into recovery and I went through that 4th step that I really took a good look at myself. And interestingly, post-traumatic growth, so my early work in sort of the mental health space for first responders was really about break the stigma, go get help. If resilience is made of those things, make sure you're practicing them in some way in your life, and that's about all I knew. And then I happened to be at this conference, and I saw the organization is called Boulder Crest. They're out of Bluemont, Virginia. It's these two guys, Ken Falk and Josh. His last name because I don't have the book in front of me, but and I believe started. He's a retired Navy guy, and so I saw this presentation. I was like, oh my Lord! I had already given the TED talk. I knew about this thing called post-traumatic growth, but I didn't know what it was. These are guys running workshops where there's a process that you can go through. And I was like, holy shit, sign me up. What do I got to do? Well, you got to do it yourself first. And I was like, all right, I'll do it. I went to a workshop in Miami. It's essentially, the process is like a 5-step process. It's education. You got to know it exists. Relation, which is about, what do you do? What are your wellness practices for your body, your mind, because finances can be a tremendous strain. What kind of wellness practices do you have in there? Or what are unwellness practices that you have in there that are causing problems for you? And who are like the 3 to 5 people you're hanging out with? And are they practicing those things? Or are they causing trouble in your life? Closure, part of post-traumatic growth, and the lessons that I've learned. If I'm gonna I'm going to, have these pebbles in my backpack, and I'm going to chip away at them through disclosure, and the rubble falls away. Well, what are the gems that I'm going to take within the sort of inform who I get to become? And then finally being of service, So I'm in this workshop, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, I've done my step work. I'm sober. I'm a professional kind of in the the resilience and mental health space. And so I'm kind of half participating, and they show this piece of pottery up on the, and it's called kintsugi. I'm probably mispronouncing it. I believe it's called kintsugi. It's this Japanese pottery, and what it is when pottery breaks, they will put it back together using like gold or some precious metal. And the idea is that it actually came from a samurai who took his teacup, his favorite teacup, and so he had this goldsmith or a craftsman put it back together, and he believed it was more beautiful than it was first made. And so they show this cup. And I'm like, oh God. And so what happened is when my son graduated from Marine Corps boot camp, I gave him a piece of pottery like that, but nobody in the classroom knew. So they're like, who knows what this is? And I raised my hand. Nobody else raises their hand. They're like, well, how do you know? And so I begin my process of disclosure, and man crying in this classroom. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening to me right now. Like tears are coming out. If you know about hormone producing things that we do to help mitigate the stress hormones in our body, it's a healthy thing that we do. And clearly, I needed to do that. And so I talk about it. I talk about, this thing with my son and how devastating it was to me. And at this point in my life, I am working on my amends, and and I had made my amends to my son, and I said to him, because when I was doing my resentment list, like the guys that did this to him, they're on my resentment list. I'm trying to figure out like, what's my part in it. And when I make my amends to him, I'm like, I'm sorry that I wasn't a better dad for you, and I talk about this kintsugi thing, and I'm thinking about it. I'm gnawing on this idea of post-traumatic growth and what is your new story, because there's who you thought you were before bad shit happens, and who do you become as a result of having gone through this hard thing. And it's not until then that I discover I'm a guy that gets to help people show up for the people they love in ways that I couldn't before. And that's sort of how I grow through post-traumatic growth. That's like who I become as a result of going through this process, And so I'm like, all right, well, I am like dedicated to helping other people, whether it be in sobriety or whether it be dealing with their own traumas and struggles, to find a path through, you don't have to numb out. You can face and do hard things and come out on the other side and use that as the pivotal thing that makes you the new person who you are. So instead of having an I got to list in life, you have an I get to list in life, And so for me, that was at least 3 or 4 years, between the time the thing happened to my son, getting sober, and then going through this post-traumatic growth workshop. It's a period of time, but I kind of like come through it. I'm like, all right, I think I get it, I think I get it. And so the idea that our trauma or difficulties, whatever you want to call it, is really connected to our core values. And those are unique to all of us, which is why, like I always say, it's not the trauma Olympics. Nobody's getting the gold medal, for having the worst of the most, because there's always the sergeant that wants to be like, hey, you think that's bad, kid. It's not about comparing. It's about being able to identify different circumstances, same feel. And so being able to meet people where they're at, and say, yeah, that sounds hard for you, and let's talk about it. Let's figure out a way for you to go through this and a path out so you can become who you're meant to become, because life is going to throw crap at us. And the choice we have is whether we're going to be a victim of that or not, and we don't have to be, life will be lifey, but we don't have to be a victim of it. So So that was kind of my path through all that, and how I got to where I am now, and the work that I do now, is really about helping others and being of service, but I didn't get to go from step 1 to 12, and I didn't get to go from step education to service. I had to go through the middle and do my own work. That's the thing that gives you credibility with others, and so I've got a friend who's going through a hard time now, and I'm like, hey man, do you believe that I believe you're going to be okay? Because he doesn't have a lot of faith, and he's like, yeah, I believe you believe I'm going to be okay. I'm like, then borrow my belief in you for now until you can have your own. You have to give people hope. I think they find that the most people who die by suicide or something are,
yeah, they've lost hope. They've given up, and I always like to say that as long as you have that flicker, it's kind of like that gas fireplace. As long as you have that pilot light on, you have a chance of starting that fire again. It's when it goes out that's when the end is near.
Yeah. And it can be dark at times.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, life is not just it's not cupcakes and rainbow unicorn farts for me now. I mean, it still gets hard at times, but this too shall pass. And,
yeah, it doesn't. It's not perfect. It's not perfect.
No, and I tell my wife, I say it's like this for now, not forever. And then when I'm going through a hard time, she says it back to me. I'm like, I hate that expression when it gets used on me. I think other people like it, but when she uses it back at me, I'm like, don't give me that stuff. So I'm a worst enemy sometimes.
Well, one of the things I like about what you just said, and I tell the patients this a lot, because somebody asked me, just this week, as a matter of fact, at the hospital, when I got sober, like what was the process for you? What was the process? And recovery seems to be this time when you do a lot of introspection. You look at how you got to where you were, knowing that there's also the genetic predisposition, and that you cannot ever safely drink again. And if you're out there struggling and you think that you're going to listen to this podcast or go to recovery to manage your drinking or be able to learn to drink responsibility, the fact that you're in treatment, I think you've already demonstrated that's already been a settled question. Okay, it's not going to happen. So how do we live a sober life? And that was what I had to face. And you hit on something, and that was that you go and you reflect on the good things in your life, the things that you do well. And I want everybody that's out there listening to understand that each and every one of you has strengths. Okay, you do have strengths, and I'm assuming there are times in your life when things were going well, and you can tap back into that. And like you, John, I was able to look back and what were the things I was doing. What was I doing? What was important to me when things were going well before alcohol started to take over? And I started to tap back into those things. And I know that for me, one of the things that became important to me was setting that example to other people and becoming that guy. Like it was always important to me once I got sober to not be the guy that everybody looked at and said, oh, yeah, did you hear about what happened to him? Here he is, he's preaching this stuff, he's talking about getting well, but then look what happened to him. See, that's just another guy, that's another hypocrite. And that was important to me, that would not happen. And so I kind of used that as fuel to push through the addiction, to get well, to start working the steps and getting better. And then discipline. When I found in my life, when I had a goal and I had a purpose, and I was striving, that helped. Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. People essentially have three questions that they're trying to answer in their life, and that's who am I, what is my purpose, and where do I belong? What's my identity? And why am I here? And who are my people? They're very, very basic needs. But everybody's trying to find that. And I think the issue of, and they say, I didn't understand the terminology taking it on a moral issue at first. I would hear people say, oh, you're taking your addiction on a moral issue, you're taking whatever on a moral issue, mental health on a moral issue, whatever it might be, drinking, gambling, all those things. And I never understood it. And then I realized later in my sobriety that I think what people were talking about is like, if you were just a better person, you wouldn't have this problem. And that's just not the way that addiction works. It's just not the way that these things work. They are diseases that we have that require a certain type of treatment, and and being of good character is not the solution to that. It certainly helps, but it's not going to get you over the finish line. And so, for me, learning that was a piece of surrender. For me, a piece of surrender was learning things. I had to practice my sobriety, just like I have to practice mental health. I have to practice physical fitness. I have to practice financial wellness and spiritual wellness. They are all practices. And I always tell people, just because I worked out 10 years ago doesn't make me physically fit today. Well, that's true mentally, spiritually, emotionally, financially, all those things. They're things I have to practice. And so sobriety is the same way too. I was just reflecting, I'm coming up on 3 years, and I had this person say to me the other day, like, the first year is about physical sobriety. It's about putting down the drink and getting sober. The second year is like emotional sobriety. Now that the drink's down, everything that you struggled with in life is still there. So how are you going to learn to navigate it emotionally? And then the third year, they said, is about spiritual sobriety. And that's about your relationship with your higher power. And I was thinking about that a lot today, because definitely year 2, I put the alcohol down, and all my other character defects are like ready to like grow to full size, because they're like, well, you're still uncomfortable. So why don't you, buy more stuff from Amazon? Why don't you, go quit your job and start a new job somewhere else? Why don't you go do this? And so all the things that make me want to run away from the discomfort of myself, start propping the character defects, and like learning to navigate that. And the thing that I learned through, sponsorship and through really listening to kind of the elders and people who've been there and walked the path is the spiritual answer. They say it's a spiritual program. And so really leaning into, if there is something greater than me that is going to help me, what is it? And how do I lean into that and practice that, so that, because that is the hole in my soul that I am trying to fill. And I tried to fill it with alcohol. I can try to fill it with all sorts of other things. And really for me, it's the connection with my higher power. It's my connection with spirituality, in whatever form that may be for a person. And I've just found that to be true for me, and I haven't quite figured it all out yet, but the more I lean into that, the better things seem to get. And, I'll tell you this, I was teaching a class the other day, and, there was a guy who's asking, we were going over the difference between guilt and shame. And, and the difference really is guilt bad, I made a mistake, versus I am bad, I am inner voice, the negative inner voice is shame. And so I'm explaining this to him, and then he starts talking about having difficulty with one of his children because, he's getting divorced. And I realized, I hadn't talked about my daughter, but when I divorced her mom, it really put a strain on my relationship with her. And I was trying to figure out my piece in it, and I felt a lot of shame about that too. Like, if I was just a better dad, right? If I was just a better dad, if I just did this, if I just did that, I wouldn't have this problem. And it actually clarified things for me. And I can only thank sobriety for this sort of clarity and peace of mind to be able to work through some of the other difficulties in my life, is that I maybe have some guilt around, maybe not getting divorced in the best way, or maybe not handling everything in the best way. I was still drinking back then, but I know in my heart that I'm literally the best version of her dad she has ever had now. And I can say that with a clear conscience, that I am reliable for her. I'm reliable for myself. I'm trustworthy for her. I'm trustworthy for myself. And that my living amends to her is to keep showing up in her life as the sober version of her dad. And so again, I was sort of taking my own shame around other issues on a moral issue. and really realizing that I don't need to do that. I don't need, there's certain burdens I don't need to carry anymore. And I have to thank the process of getting sober for helping me do that. It's really given me a life. They say a life like no other. I have clarity on things that used to baffle me. And I am really eternally grateful for that.
Yeah, it is so interesting that you went through a very similar process that I did. And you mentioned the first year, physically just getting well, the second year, emotionally getting well, and then spiritually. And if those of you that listen to this podcast, if you go back a couple of years, it's very interesting, John. I almost got goosebumps when you said that, because I was giving some observations that I'd had in recovery, and I made a very similar observation and did an entire podcast on that. And I tell patients all the time that what you'll notice is the people that get well tend to do the same things and notice the same things, and the people that tend not to get well in recovery also do the same things. And it's just a matter of, do you want to get well or do you not? Or who are you going to model yourselves after? And in that particular podcast, I expanded on it a little bit. There was a little bit more to some things I had looked at, and that was, I looked at it as a 5-year cycle. And that is that first year becoming physical. You definitely got to deal with the physical part of addiction. We've done a lot of damage to our bodies and our brains. There's neuropathways that have changed, the B series of vitamins not absorbed, the minerals, GABA levels, serotonin, all this kind of stuff. And I'll bore you with that some other day, but that we got to work on that. That's the physical part. And then I looked at it like the second year, really controlling the emotions, the ups and downs. Part of that's post-acute withdrawal syndrome, but then also just kind of managing the emotions from all the damage that we've done in our life. Then the third year, and this is just me talking about, was the psychological part. What is it about Mike that when stress happens, he wants to go drink? Psychologically, what's driving me for that? Then the fourth year that's when I personally became very focused on my spiritual development, my spiritual journey, and figuring out like this whole business of higher power. Those of you that have been to AA meetings know that we talk about higher power quite a bit. Well, what does that mean? So for me, that's when I really tried to figure out what that meant for me. And then the fifth year was not that you got it, but you recognize that cycle. But it's interesting that you came to the same observation point that I did. I find that very fascinating.
Yeah. And I really don't know what the next few years are going to hold for me. I actually sponsor a guy that's got more time than me in the program, but he hadn't done the steps. And he asked me to take him through the step process. And he just got his 5 years this weekend. And so I actually bought him a bag of marbles, because they say you get your marbles back at 5 years. So I don't even have mine back yet. But and then they say at 10 years, you know how to play with them. And so I'm a ways away from having a complete set of marbles or even knowing what to do with them. But I don't know exactly why. I have a sponsor. His name's George. I've got another guy. I could say I need a sponsor and a half, because I'm that big of a pain in the ass. But I've got another guy, Dick, I talk to sometimes. And they're sort of older gentlemen, and they've been sober for a long time. And they're very sort of traditional in the way that they approach the program, and they are just kind and patient, and they're great for me to talk to. They give me wisdom that I didn't have. I didn't have people like that in my life. I didn't have people that I could talk to about these things, and so I'm getting advice that I always wish I'd had. It's like having two older grandpas or something that you never really got to spend time gleaning the wisdom of life from, and these two they happen to be sober as well, and so they've got a lot of really good reflections on their own struggles, people they've sponsored who've gone through similar things, and so I guess I could white knuckle it, try to beat myself up for answers, but I did that for 20 something years, and it only got me more alcoholism and more frustration. So I was at the point where I was like, listen, I know what I did and that didn't work. So I'm absolutely willing to try somebody else's idea, because mine's not going so well for me. And so I try to take their suggestions, and and I don't know quite how it unfolds. It just does. And I know that if I'm struggling, but if I lean in and try a little harder, that things get better. And I feel like I've got this generation of sort of sober people I came in with, and I see the new ones come in underneath me, and I see the older ones just ahead of me, and I've got my little pack that I work with, and we're always checking in with each other, like, you struggling with this year? And they're like, yeah, you know what? Funny you should mention that. I'm having a hard time with that too. And so, the nice thing about it is, you're not alone. I thought I was the only one in the world that had the issues that I had, and keeping that inside, again, you're only as sick as your secrets. Like, if anybody knew this about me, what would they think? That's that shame piece. And then for me, I walked into recovery. I said, this is the ugliest version of myself. People cheered and I knew I was in the right place, so.
Yeah, it is so true. And I'll tell you what, everybody could be. This is not even just about people that need to be in recovery for drugs and alcohol. This is what we're talking about are concepts that would help anyone, even if you don't struggle with alcohol. I've often said I think everybody needs to be in a 12-step program of some sort. I think the world would just be a better place if that was true.
Absolutely. My friend Colette, her husband, is a sober. He's not one of us, and he says, I wish there was Assholes Anonymous for everybody else, because he can see the miracle of the program working in people's lives. And there's lots of 12-step programs for different people. Whether you have struggles with food or sex or drugs or gambling. I mean, there's help out there for everybody.
There is.
And you just got to reach out and ask for it. And that's I think the hardest step. The hardest thing you ever have to do is walk through those doors. It's the longest mile, so to speak. I saw a young woman get up and get her 24-hour chip, and I was like, man, that is the hardest thing I think I've ever done. Mm-hmm. And this one guy, in our meetings, he'll often say, you never have to get sober again. You never have to feel that way again, and staying sober is a lot easier than getting sober. And
oh my gosh, is that not the truth? Yeah.
Yeah, so he's right. And I listen to people, a woman, Sean, she was sharing a few weeks ago, and she said she talked about going out, and using again. This is a number of years ago that she had, but her advice to everybody was you might think that, oh, I'll just have this one drink. Oh, I'll just do this one thing this one time because I deserve it, or because stuff is hard. It's like, part's not up to you. As soon as you pick that thing up, it is up to your disease when and if you will get back. And I am absolutely willing to take her advice and listen to her suggestion and not have to go out and do some more research and development on my own. I believe her, and I'm here to stay. So I feel really blessed that I have people who are willing to share their experience with me, their hope with me, their strength with me, because I need it.
That is so true. Wow. Just such powerful words of wisdom. John, you and I could talk for hours. It seems like subject after subject, and we'll have to do that. We'll have to have you back on the program because there are so many layers to this to go through. And I'm just so excited for you, and congratulations on your 3 years of sobriety.
Thank you.
I know people are out there listening just saying, oh my gosh, how do you do that? Well, we do it one day at a time. And we do that by doing all the things that you suggested, and I think that it's not even so much that you were doing the right things. You were willing to listen, and that's what I like about that. It was that willingness. That's one of the things in recovery is just having the willingness to listen to others. And you mentioned the suggestions, right? And just taking the suggestions. These aren't directions. They're not orders from other people, because you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything that we're saying. They're just suggestions. But as I heard at a meeting one time, it's like, when you jump out of an airplane, you don't have to put a parachute on. It's recommended. It's suggested that you put a parachute on, but you do whatever you want to do. It's up to you. But we really suggest that you put one on. That's kind of how recovery is. So how could the listeners get hold of you? Kind of put out your social media and because like I say, if you've not seen this Portsmouth TEDx talk with John, check it out. It was very, very, very good. But what other things can people look up on you?
Sure. I'm just under Facebook and Instagram is John Monahan the Third, and that's 123 or Roman numerals 123. You can just Google John Monahan. It's with a G. That's the way they spell it in Ireland. TED Talk, and I should come up, especially if you do police work. It'll pop up, so that's how you would find me. I do kind of have a side business that it's called Deep Blue Compass. There's a website there. It doesn't have a lot on it, but that's one way that you could kind of snoop around and get to know something about me. And I guess the thing I didn't say, one of the interesting things that's also a parallel with recovery and post-traumatic growth is when in post-traumatic growth, the thing that they notice, that whether it be a prisoner of war, people who have gone through grief, or people who've gone through a serious trauma, the 5 areas of growth they find in them are new possibilities, in life that they didn't realize were possible before, deeper, more meaningful relationships, more strength, like if I can go through that, I can go through anything, a greater appreciation for life, and spiritual and existential changes. And I got to say, if there is not an absolute parallel between the process of recovering from whatever you might be recovering and how we can grow through hard things, I don't know what is. So I found that to be true for me. They say when we share at meetings, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And I got to say, for me now, in addition to being able to teach about, post-traumatic growth, wellness, resiliency factors for folks, and helping other first responders be able to have healthier lives than maybe I was able to have. I gave a TED Talk, and I actually do stand-up comedy on the side.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I know. And so I had as I describe it, I had some shit to say. And so my big sort of gold star on the refrigerator was the one bar in Franconia where I had been for their headliner comic. And so I got to do a 10-minute comedy sketch in the town that I used to be a police chief in, and I actually got paid to do it. So that is stuff I never ever would have done if I hadn't gotten sober, So in addition to just better relationships, like, life really opens up in ways that you never expected it to. So, as they say, keep coming, and wait for the miracle to happen.
Oh, man, fantastic. Well, John, thank you so much for bringing this to us, and look forward to having you on the program again. So, folks, with that, as I mentioned earlier, this episode of Recovery is Possible is brought to you by Retreat Behavioral Health, where there are endless possibilities for recovery. Retreat provides quality care at their leading mental health and substance use treatment centers, which are designed to offer patients truly personalized and comprehensive programs that are tailored to their needs. So Retreat Substance Use and Mental Health Treatment Centers in Palm Beach County, Florida, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and New Haven, Connecticut do everything in their power to ensure that patients receive the highest quality treatment in a safe and comfortable setting. So reach out today at retreatbehavioralhealth.com or call at 855-802-6600 for more information. And John, thank you so much for coming on the program, and we'll be talking with you soon.
All right. I look forward to it. Take good care.
You too. All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
You guys take care. Recovery is possible. You can do it. John's a living example of that. So one day at a time. We'll talk with you soon.